Can Arsenal do it again? It's so nice to be able to say that Arsenal are the defending Premier League champions, but here comes the difficult part now. Can Arsenal go on and retain it? Because I think Arsenal are in a very fascinating position heading into the new season. You know, we're Premier League champions. We finally got over the line. I think we've got an incredibly strong squad. I think we've got stability that a lot of clubs can't really match us with in the league. But I don't think that the squad is perfect neither. And I think that the squad could definitely be improved on, particularly in the attack. And that's where I'm going to be very interested to see how Mikel Arteta evolves the team now that he's finally won the Premier League. And in this video, I kind of wanted to look at the Arsenal squad from top to bottom and go through each player, the role that they'll have in the squad for next season, and where I think that we can improve on and what I expect from Arteta tactically, and ultimately find out whether Arsenal can do it again. And I think like the question whether we can do it again, I think it's quite interesting because I'm very positive going into next season. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that like we're definitely gonna retain the title because I don't think football kind of really works like that. And when you start expecting, I think football has a way of humbling you. But I definitely think that Arsenal are in a very strong position. You know, we've got stability. I think we've got a manager that's been here for years. We've got a squad that has been built over numerous transfer windows, and we've got a squad now that has experienced winning the Premier League, you know, and I think there's still hunger within the group. I think obviously losing the Champions League final at the end of last season was disappointing, but I think in a strange way that it could almost be an extra motivator for next season. You know, I'm not saying that losing the final is a good thing, but I would imagine that like when you lose like in the manner that we did on penalties in Europe's premier competitions, you know, you come so close that I think it could act as like even like the players could have more desire to go again next season. And that's kind of where I'm at with Arsenal at the moment. You know, I think I want more. Like winning the Premier League was like honestly amazing and I'll cherish it, but it's one Premier League title. Like I want us to go again. I want us to go and retain the title. I'd love us to win the FA Cup, the League Cup. The Champions League is obviously a dream, but when I'm looking at the Premier League landscape as well, and like looking at the obvious potential challengers to Arsenal for the league, like Man City are heading into a new era with Enzo Maresca and Pep Guardiola leaving. Liverpool are starting a new era with Slot having left the club and Areola coming in. So like there's a lot of kind of uncertainty around a lot of like the bigger clubs that you'd expect to be up there, and that's where Arsenal have an edge over those clubs, and it's the stability that we have now. Obviously, having this stability doesn't automatically mean that Arsenal are going to go on and win the league again. I don't want to sound entitled because I don't think you should go into a season expecting, but I think we should be challenging. You know, I think that that should be a minimum standard for Arsenal. I don't think it's a case that like we need to rip up everything and just start again. It's about how we can raise the level, and I think that's kind of like the difference now. I think Arsenal of old were looking for players to come and try and make us competitive, whereas now I think we are competitive, and it's about how can we make the squad even better. And I think that's what kind of winners do. Like, you know, you don't rest on your laurels. You know, I think like the fact that we've now won the league, you know, I think we should, you know, strive to improve the squad. And you obviously enjoy winning like the trophy that, you know, we've waited 22 years for. But I think the mentality that I want Arsenal to have going into next season is that like we go again, you know, and our defense is the main reason why we are champions. I think our collective mentality is another reason why we are champions. Arteta has built a culture at the club where everyone is expected to work hard for the team, and I don't think we should abandon that, but I think it's a case of whether we can add another dimension to it. So what do Arsenal need heading into next season? Before the window started, I kind of wanted a midfield player to come in that could maybe take the burden off of Declan Rice. We've now added that in Bruno Guimaraes, and I really like that signing, you know, because he can play instead of Rice, but also can play with him. And I think that could be a brilliant partnership. That Bruno Guimaraes signing also signifies to me that he's, when you're looking at him as a player, he's 28, turning 29. It's very much a player that is being brought in for the here and now. Like, this isn't a project signing. Elsewhere in the squad, we've lost Leandro Trossard, and I think, look, he deserves enormous credit for the contribution that he had with his time at the club. I don't think that he was, spectacular. I think he was quite frustrating even at times, but I think what Trossard brought to the squad was he brought important goals, and he brought important moments, and kind of when Arsenal needed something, he seemed to be the player that would step up for Arsenal. So like, he's going to be a big miss, because those type of players are really hard to kind of replicate in the squad. Like, we've brought in Christian Zolis, who's going to be his replacement, and I like Zolis. What I've seen from him in the preseason so far, I think he's contributed with goals and assists, and not just that, I think his kind of general play seems to be quite good, and he's kind of got those qualities that kind of Trossard has in kind of being quite good in and around the box. And I think he's a player that kind of could go under the radar, in the sense that, like, maybe there's not really many people talking about the player, but he could be one of those players that kind of becomes very useful. And it doesn't scream to me that he's going to be the starting left winger. Like, I definitely view him as an attacking option, but I think I'd want one more kind of forward player there. Ideally, I'd want a left winger and a striker to come in, but I'm not going to be greedy. I think if we can get one, I think I'd be kind of happy enough to go with that, because I think we're at the stage now with Arsenal where I think it's about bringing in like certain improvements. I don't really want to make sideward steps anymore. I think you want to look at a player coming in and say he's a definite upgrade, and whether that kind of player exists in the market is another question. I'm not going to sit here and say that Arsenal need to spend 100 million on reinforcements. I think I understand the market the way it is. The quality of the attacking options may not be there, and especially with the prices that are being quoted for some of these attacking options that have potential, but you're not really kind of sure on. I think like that's just the way the market is. I think like we tried to get Vinicius Junior. It was ambitious. It's not going to happen now, but it's about kind of moving on from him and who's going to be the next kind of star player. I think that's the type of player that Arsenal should be in for now. I think we're heading into a new kind of era in that sense, and we are an attractive option for those type of players. A player I want to touch on next is Martinelli. Football is a ruthless business, and I think like Martinelli can be upgraded on. Like, I think we need to go and improve on Martinelli, but I think at the same time, if like the upgrade isn't there, like a clear upgrade, then I wouldn't replace him. I'd want someone that's a definite kind of improvement on him. That is the priority for me. I think some people might say that the striker is more important, but I just think that the difference between having a Zolis and a Martinelli on our left side is kind of more important than like the difference in having Havertz and Gyökeres, because for me, look, I think Havertz and Gyökeres, they're both not the answer for the striker position for Arsenal, but they both offer something to the team. I think Gyökeres, he comes under a lot of scrutiny. I think he's obviously clunky. He's not the best like to look at on the eye. He's not aesthetically pleasing, but I think he does offer us something different, and I think it's quite refreshing to have a different kind of profile like that in terms of him wanting to attack the space, his channel runs, and he's a bit of a nuisance there at times. I don't think he's anywhere kind of near good enough technically, but he's a bit of a throwback striker, and I kind of like that, to be honest with you. And he played his part in us getting over the line with the Premier League. Was he instrumental? No, but he scored important goals important times when we needed him to, and he definitely contributed. The same with Havertz. He's a different type of player. I think he can drop into the midfield. I think he's good at winning aerial duels, and I think he's good at bringing the other players around him into the game a bit more, with his link-up play. and definitely kind of the wide players play better when Havertz is in the team. So I definitely think like both strikers can offer us something. If we can upgrade on them, of course, I would do it. But I think that we're not kind of desperate there at the moment. I think there's definitely more priorities for me. Another area, though, I think that we could definitely maybe add a different kind of quality or a different type of profile is the right back position. I don't think like we should necessarily be going for another kind of centre back, full back hybrid, because that's what we tend to go for. You know, we've got many of them in the squad already, but I'd love uh right back to come into the squad that could be just a bit more adventurous, you know, just give us a bit more of an attacking dynamic. And kind of like I'm looking at that right back situation, and like Timber is kind of working his way back into fitness, and I think he's missing the start of the season. Ben White has had his fitness issues in the past, and I don't know whether we're going to see the same version of Ben White that we seen a few years ago when he was very good on that right hand side, linking with Saka, linking with Odegaard. He was overlapping and interchanging, and the rotations, they kind of seem to have that down to a T. I was at the Arsenal and Liverpool game in the Emirates. It was a 0-0 game on a Thursday night, an absolutely awful game. But I noticed something in that match was on the last line of Liverpool's defence. I could see Timber was kind of hovering around that area. It meant that Cody Gakpo, who was playing on the left side for Liverpool, he was following him. And I just kind of noticed that, like, you know, I was kind of like, what are we asking Timber to do here in this position? You know, because I just don't think you can kind of like ask him to try and create something there on the last line. And look, maybe it could be an instruction that it was just him to kind of hold that position there, make Gakpo follow you, and then that means it could open up space for somebody else. But I just think like if Arteta is going to ask his fullback to be so high up in that position, would it not be better to have somebody that's more kind of naturally suited to that job? Something that I really love about this current Arsenal team is just the way that they approach their defending, you know, and I love it, you know, because I just look at some of the blocks that they make, the interceptions that they make, the recovery runs, the last ditch tackles, you know, players throwing themselves in front of shots, and like the way that we defend our box too, you know, the way that kind of David Raya just makes unbelievable saves there at times, and you're thinking like, how has he kept that out? And I think that that's a massive advantage that Arsenal have, and you know that I want to continue going into next season. You know, like it shouldn't go unnoted that you know we lost the Champions League final to PSG, but if you really watch that game deep down, like we kept PSG really quiet in that game, and I think that that isn't an accident. I think that that's the result of building a defensive kind of identity over many years. So that's why I'm looking at the defense next season. How it's not about how do we improve it, it's about how do we preserve it. What worries me a small bit is that William Saliba, he's obviously going to miss the start of the season due to a back injury. I think he's going to be a huge miss. You know, I personally think he's the best defender in the world. I don't say that lightly either. I think some of his defensive qualities, the way that he intercepts, the way that he's kind of so physical, his recovery ability, and just his defensive instincts as a whole, just a complete defender. I think he's a Rolls Royce, and he's of course going to be, you know, a big kind of loss at the start of the season. But I think Arsenal have managed without him before. You know, I think Mosquera is going to be tasked with the kind of role to come in and replace Saliba. Like he isn't going to be Saliba, but I think he's a quality option that we've had, and I think he is very good on the ball in terms of our build up play, and he is a good defender in his own right, but he's quite raw. He's a player that's young and he has potential. So of course, like when you're looking at him there, like it could be a case that maybe teams will look to target him. But I definitely think that like the defensive structure that we have isn't just down to kind of one player; it's the whole unit. So I personally believe we'll be okay at the start of the season, and that like we'd have enough to kind of get through there when you've got Gabriel alongside him. Hopefully Timber can come back, and maybe Calafiori would just look a lot more kind of defensively secure there. So that's kind of the reason why I'd be confident that we'd be kind of okay. I'm kind of more concerned really with the right back situation. I mentioned Timber there. You know, I don't know what way his kind of injury is kind of panning out, because he was obviously missing the back end of last season. He then came on in the Champions League final. He then didn't make the World Cup, and now he's going to miss the start of the season. So I'm kind of worried there what's going to happen with him. Then you have like the other options, like Hincapié that we bought. I'm really glad that we bought Hincapié. I think he's a warrior. I think he's so committed. I think he's aggressive. I think he's such a useful defender that you can play him left back and you can play him in the centre back. The one area though of the defence that would worry me if we did lose him would be David Raya, because like I just think he's an unbelievable goalkeeper. Like I think his catalogue of saves, they keep growing. I think he's just so important to the team just in terms of his distribution, his positioning, his cross claiming, his kind of decision making at the back, and like he's just so confident on the ball in possession. And I think like if we were to lose him, like the backups that we have at the moment, Melie and Kepa, they're grand to come in for maybe an FA Cup or a League Cup game or maybe newly promoted team at home. Do you know what I mean? But for the rest of the games, like we're going to need David Raya. So that would be kind of the kind of, one area where I think like we would be in serious trouble if we did lose him. And that's where I move on to the midfield. And I think that it's a very interesting position on the pitch that I'm going to be looking at heading into next season, because I think we've got a really good mix of profiles in that area now, and it's going to be interesting to me to see how Arteta uses his pieces and what he has, because what we saw at kind of most of last season was a double pivot of Declan Rice and Zubimendi, and then you'd have either Odegaard or Eze further advanced. But I really liked the balance that Zubimendi and Rice gave in the midfield for most of the season. I thought they built up a good partnership together. I think they gave Arsenal a lot of security on and off the ball. I think Zubimendi often would go further forward, Rice would stay, and vice versa. And they just kind of seemed to kind of understand each other's movements, and they kind of complemented each other very well, I felt. Rice is very kind of an athletic midfielder. He's brilliant defensively, eats up the ground, and he can carry the ball forward. I think, having Zubimendi behind Rice, I think it gave him that kind of extra freedom, and that role kind of suited Rice a lot more with his box-to-box kind of abilities than, being in that kind of left half space and receiving it with his back to goal. That just doesn't suit him. So it definitely kind of got the best out of Rice, in my opinion. When Bruno comes in now, what's gonna like happen to the midfield? Zubimendi, is he gonna just become a bench player, a squad player? And like Bruno and Rice, like on paper, that just sounds so strong. Like you've got two players that are just brilliant with the defensive work. I think Bruno G can play a lot like more. I think he's got more to his game. But you've got like two like aggressive players there, like, and two players that can cover a lot of ground. And I think that like would give Arsenal a really, really strong base. But like, what will happen to Zubimendi? I think Zubimendi, I think he's a very good footballer. He's actually surprised me for like a player of his stature. He's actually, I think he ranks among like the high percentile of kind of aerial duels won and stuff. He's very good at actually leaping and kind of winning headers, which is quite kind of surprise for his stature, but that's the kind of player that he was for us last season. So what's going to like happen to him, if he barely plays? Like the same kind of applies to Lewis-Skelly. I think we've seen Lewis-Skelly when he was first broke into the Arsenal team. He broke in at left back and he was inverting and coming into midfield. But Lewis-Skelly is a natural midfielder, and I'm glad that towards the end of last season, Arteta realised that and he moved him into that area. And I think that that's kind of where his development is going to be in the future, and he gives something to Arsenal that's so different that we don't have. He receives the ball under pressure. He's able to use a body feint. He's able to draw a man in and just spin away and run into space. And I think he's got a good line breaking pass on him as well. So you have options now to maybe like take out a Rice if you need to give him that rest, because he clearly needs it with the kind of player that he is and the work that he does off the ball, So then you look at the kind of further advanced central midfield role, which generally was Odegaard and Eze's position. I think like I'm looking for a big season from Odegaard, to be honest with you. I think it was quite unfortunate last year that he picked up a few injuries. I think he had couple of shoulder injuries, and then I don't know, did he have a knee injury of some sort, or I don't know, I could be remembering wrong now, but he's very much a volume player. He wants the ball, he comes towards it, he likes to get involved, and he likes to progress Arsenal up the pitch. But sometimes what I find is when Odegaard comes deep, he's often kind of like the deepest midfield player, and he helps progress the ball, but then he's not in the position to hurt teams. So that's where I'm looking next season. Could maybe the stability of a Rice and a Bruno G behind him, could that give Odegaard just that extra license and that extra freedom that he doesn't have to drop as deep to progress the play, because we've got better options there already to progress it, and he doesn't need to do that. So I think he can rediscover his form, and I'm backing him to rediscover his form. And the other option then is Eze. I think he's quite a fascinating player in the squad, because I think his first season with Arsenal, he was getting better under Arteta's system. I think like you could clearly see when he first came in, he was a player that was kind of learning the demands of Arteta in terms of kind of working back and putting in that defensive responsibility. And I've even been at games last season where I've seen him run back, win the ball, and I'm like, that's what Arteta wants. So I think like next season, having a year's experience under Arteta's system and learning his methods, I think that we could start to see the best of Eze, because Eze is one of those profiles of players that he's so unpredictable. He can draw a man in again. He can use a feint. He leans that way, then he goes the other way. He can just produce a moment of magic from pretty much nothing, and that's kind of like those type of players are so valuable to have, and I don't think we have many of them in the squad. So I think with Eze, I'm a big fan of Eze, but I want a big season from him too, and I want to see more from him. But yeah, I think just generally kind of just looking at the midfield as a whole with all the options that I described, I didn't even mention Mikel Merino. I personally think he's a better further forward player than he is a deeper one, so I won't kind of count him in this conversation. But I think that Arsenal need different midfield for different games. Sometimes a certain team, they might kind of maybe low block us. So maybe Lewis-Skelly, he can carry the ball and kind of do things by himself. Almost kind of, you don't need 3 or 4 passes sometimes to progress up the pitch with a Lewis-Skelly, because he can do it for you. And maybe a team might want to attack us a bit more, so you can have a midfield of Bruno G and Rice and use kind of their athleticism, and that could become more important. Maybe there might be certain games where Zubimendi, the game could suit him, so maybe he might start. And then further advanced, you've got Eze or Odegaard, depending on the game state or the team that we're playing against. You've got options there, and I think it's just a great kind of thing that Arteta has at his disposal. But what I wanted to ask is kind of how adventurous do you think Arteta could actually be? And I think we've actually seen him try to be adventurous with the midfield last season. There was a stage at the start of last season when Rice was the lone 6 and he had Eze and Odegaard in front as kind of dual 8s, dual 10s. Unfortunately, what happened with Odegaard's injuries, we couldn't really see how that midfield trio could develop. The Bruno G signing is kind of an interesting signing for me, because I think he is a technically very good player, but he's also a warrior. He's physical, he's aggressive, he's a ball winner, and I think he'll run through a wall for you, and I think he's the perfect signing for Arteta in that sense. So I think Bruno could make Arsenal even more defensively secure, which is a crazy thought. And I think it just begs the kind of question, are we going to see a huge tactical revolution this season? And honestly, I don't think we will, to be honest. I think we'll see evolution of the system. I think we'll see tweaks. I think we'll see different combinations. But I don't think Arteta is just going to throw away that defensive security that has just won us a Premier League title and that got us to a Champions League final. Moving on to the next area of the team that definitely needs improvement on, if I'm going to be honest, and that's the attack. We don't have enough killers in the squad, to be honest with you. I think, obviously, Saka, I think he's our right winger. He's our starting right winger. And I think, for Saka, I think he could definitely do with another kind of premium forward, or someone that can complement him and take some of the burden away from him, because I think, Saka's just constantly doubled up on. He's our creator. He's the person that we look to in the forward line. And I think, we could definitely do with like another threat there, whether it be on the left or whether it be down the middle and elsewhere. Madueke, I'm still like in the boat where I think the jury is still out on him, to be honest with you. I think I understand why Arteta brought that type of profile, because he's very good at beating his man, his end product. It's just not good enough, for me. I think like it's something that he definitely has to improve on. Like, and I'm looking at him next season to have a better impact next year in terms of like better deliveries, more goals, more assists, more consistency. Because I think that beating your man is only one part of the job. You actually have to do something with the advantage that you've created. So the reason why Arteta bought him, I think like it could be a similar aspect as to why Pep bought Doku, and look at what Pep did with Doku. I think Doku, when he first came in at City, it was clear like he was unbelievable at beating his man on the outside, but his deliveries into the box were quite poor, but it's something he's developed. It's something that he has been coached in, and he's definitely improved that aspect of his game, and he's improved his decision making there. So maybe could Arteta kind of coach Madueke in the same kind of way, and could we start seeing kind of better numbers? I'm not asking him to be a world class winger in any aspect. He's never really going to be that, but I just want kind of a more of a threat and better output, to be honest with you. This brings me to Arteta. I've been to games, I've spoken to Arsenal fans. Of course, you're going to get some that don't like the guy, but I think every fan base is going to have that. But the general feeling when I've been to the Emirates is that it's very much a united fan base, and I think the connection between the team and the supporters is so strong now, and it's in a position where I don't think it's ever been as strong in my lifetime, to be honest with you. So I think Arteta, he deserves enormous credit for that he's brought kind of the fans on board with him. And is he perfect? Absolutely not. He's made mistakes, as I said. He's a young manager. It's his first job, but he is stubborn sometimes. I've seen him sometimes like make decisions there or move players into different positions, and I'm scratching my head going like, what are you actually doing? But I think like what he's brought to Arsenal is a real identity. Arteta is very much like a manager that plays percentage football. Like, it's about control, it's about defined margins, and it's about reducing the number of things that can go wrong. You might find it boring, you might find it frustrating, but there's a real logic behind it. I think like if he can, make us a slightly more dangerous team in the attack, then I think we've got a serious team on our hands. I think we've not reached the end of the story yet, to be honest with you. I think there's still so much more to come, and personally I can't wait for the new season, and I can't wait to see what happens. So if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next video on Let's Chat Football.